Hi, it's Mark and welcome back to No Book Left Behind, and today it's my lazy content book haul with stupid face in thumbnail. So what is this book haul all about? Well, it's kind of a last hurrah really, or at least a temporary one, if you can have one of those. In fact, I won't be posting any more book hauls for quite some time. And the reason for that I'm going to explain in my TBR for 2026 video, which will be posted at the end of the month. Just know for now, no more book hauls for quite some time. So knowing that, I decided I'd make it a bit special. So I took £50 from my bank account and decided I would use it to buy as many books as I possibly could, but not to go over that £50. The caveats, there are two of them. The first one being, couldn't be digital books, has to be a physical copy. You'll probably notice when I go through the copies that I've bought that I could perhaps buy that author's complete works for much less money for my Kobo or for a Kindle. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to get physical books. And the other caveat being they had to be books that I wanted, not ones that I just saw were cheap and thought looked interesting. They had to be ones that were on lists that I already have. And there are plenty of lists, believe me. So those were the two things, the two rules that I set myself before I started out to do this. So how many books did I manage to get? That's the big question, of course, and what were they? So let's go through them. Now, the first item, or items, it was a batch, was the thing that gave me the inspiration to do this video in the first place and to do a book haul in this kind of format. Now, these are 5 novels from tie-in to the Dark Shadows American TV horror series from the 1960s and early 1970s. Now, there's a whole raft of these. I think the series ran to about 32 books. The TV series ran to about 1,500 episodes. So the number of books is quite a few less. These do not run, they're not novelizations of the series in any sense. They run a different timeline, just using the same characters. And I got these in a batch of 5, count them, 5 for £9.99 from an online seller. So that's roughly £1.99 each. I will be rounding figures down rather than rounding them up. It doesn't really matter, it's just for convenience. So what did I get is the question. Well, you can probably see that the first volume is called Barnabas Collins and the Mysterious Ghost. And if you're familiar with the show, you'll know Barnabas Collins was the star of the show and he was a vampire. The other selections that we have in these 5, we've got Barnabas, Quentin and the Crystal Coffin. We've got Barnabas, Quentin and the Haunted Cave, Barnabas, Quentin and the Frightened Bride, and finally, and most intriguingly, Barnabas, Quentin and Dr. Jekyll's Son. So I'm looking forward to reading those. I do love the show. I'm only about 300 or 400 episodes through it so far. There's a lot of it, as you can imagine. It ran for, I think, 4 or 5 seasons. So yes, I do like the show. I enjoy the novels. They're fairly good palate cleansers. So that is where I started, and that's what gave me the inspiration to do this particular book haul. Now, moving on from there. Oh, I've got nowhere to put the books down after I finished talking about them. That was poor planning, wasn't it? Okay, I'll just put them on the floor then. Right. Next up, this was a book that I've had my eye on for some time, and it came down to a surprisingly cheap price very suddenly, and so I picked it up. It's not as cheap, it's equally the most expensive book in this haul, but it was so much cheaper than it had been previously previously on sale for, that I thought it was a must. And that's an autobiography of Robby Krieger, the guitarist with 60s psychedelic rock band The Doors, called Set the Night on Fire. And I'm a huge Doors fan. I really do dig the music, although I'd be the first to admit they weren't the most consistent of groups in terms of quality. But yeah, this is the guitarist's autobiography, and it was £4.99. So as I say, a little bit more expensive than the rest of the books that I've included here. And just referring to my notes here, that does make the total £14.98 so far, which is an average of £2.49 a book. Sorry, I'm going to be looking over there to pick up that information frequently because I haven't got my glasses on and I'm as blind as a bat. So after those first couple of purchases, I went to something that came to me from my childhood, and it's something I've always meant to read and never got around to. And it was based, well, my connection to it is this show I saw as a very young child on, I think it must have been the BBC, I think. And it was called Escape into Night. And it was about a young girl who was somehow trapped in this old house and surrounded by these standing stones that had eyes. They looked kind of a bit like tombstones. And it was really creepy. And for years I couldn't remember hardly anything about the show. And I couldn't even remember what it was called, which perhaps isn't surprising when you consider that Escape into Night is a pretty boring title. Many years later, I caught this movie fantasy film called Paper House. This was the late 1980s. And I realised somewhere through the watching experience that it was the same story as the one I remembered dimly from when I was about 6 or 7 years of age. And I enjoyed it and thought it was great, and I never really gave it much thought until I found many years later that it was based on a book. A children's book, sure, but let's not discriminate. That doesn't mean it's not going to be good. And that book is Marianne Dreams by Catherine Storr. So I've been looking forward to reading this in a sense since I was about 6. In a way. The original show Escape into Night is actually on YouTube, so once I've read the book I'm going to be watching the show again. I'm sure it won't be anything like what I remember it. It'll probably be creaky as hell, but yeah, I'm still going to looking forward to it. A bit of nostalgia there, so I'm going to be reading that one. And that one, let's just check the list, cost me £3.82, which brings the total to £18.80, and £2.68 being the average cost per book. Yeah, so that's that one. So we are now 7 books in. So that is 7 books for £18.80, which is, I'm sure you'll agree, is pretty good. Now, obviously, it doesn't stay that low because that first deal that I mentioned, the Dark Shadows books, was incredibly good. Don't get anything quite that good again. Next up, we do get another deal though. These 2 books were £7.20 the pair, and these are 2 of the Lincoln Rhyme thrillers written by Jeffery Deaver. The Cutting Edge and The Midnight Lock, which I didn't actually realise was a hardback. I don't have anything against hardbacks. I just find it's a bit uncomfortable when you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning with one of them lying on your face. I mean, it's better if it's a paperback, really. It causes less damage. I love the Lincoln Rhyme series, I really do, but I'm way, way behind on it, incredibly so. I haven't picked up one of them for years, and I do feel that's something I really need to address next year. I'm going to be including one of them per month, I think, just so I can catch up, because I do absolutely adore it. So, as I say, those 2 together were £7.20, which brings us to an even £26 for the 9 books, let's get it right, which is an average of £2.88 a book. Okay. In case you haven't guessed, maths isn't my strong point. Next up, we had something I've been meaning to check out for quite a while, and I found this for £3.99, so that was pretty reasonable. So we're a penny under £30, and the cost per book is £2.99, and this is Seishi Yokomizo's The Honjin Murders. Now, I hope I pronounced that correctly, but I very much doubt that I have. Now, this is a Japanese novel, which are now translated into English over the last few years, and there's a whole series of these detective novels. They were very, very popular in Japan, seen as classics. I'm really looking forward to reading it, because I'm kind of in love with Japanese culture in lots of ways. Yeah, it's a murder mystery, a locked room mystery, I think, and I'm always a sucker for one of those. So that's next. After that, we've got... Oh yes, this one's next. This is a little paperback of Jim Thompson's The Grifters. Now, Thompson is a huge hole in my noir reading. I've only read one of his books. That was his very first book, Now and on Earth, which wasn't really a noir. It was kind of autobiographical and very much a first novel, if you know what I mean. He hadn't really found his groove at all. And I've not read any other Thompson stuff, and I just think that's such a omission in my noir education, really. So I thought, let's get a Thompson novel. This was incredibly cheap. This was actually £2.59, bringing the total to £32.58 and £2.96 per book. So it's gone down very slightly as a result of this cheap purchase. I have seen the film of The Grifters. I did enjoy it. I thought John Cusack was great in it. He normally is, after all. The only thing I would say about it, though, is I did find all the stuff about bookmaking and betting rather confusing. It went right over my head. I mean, my best friend is actually heavily into betting. He's not a professional gambler or anything, although maybe he should be. No, he understands it all. And when he tries to explain it to me, he's pretty good at explaining it, and I can get the basics, but yeah, I'm not great at it, and I certainly didn't understand much of what they talked about in the movie. And if you want any more proof for my lack of knowledge of betting, the fact is that I bet on every NFL American football game each season. And this year, after how many games have they played so far? I don't know. We're in week 14 as I record this video, so there's been a lot of games so far. And at the moment, I think my current balance after betting on every game is, I think I'm £21 in credit. So I'm not particularly successful at it. Anyway. Next up, we've got an author I've been meaning to check out for quite a while, and I was prepared to pay top dollar for this. Well, $4.99 anyway. So again, it's one of the most expensive books in this haul. And this is Between Two Worlds by Arthur Machen. And it's certainly a very substantial volume. You can see there it's a bit of a doorstep. I'm really looking forward to this. I've heard a lot about Machen over the years. I've never read anything by him. Always wanted to. So when I had in mind to do this book haul in this way, he was one of the authors I was always going to have a volume from. And so this is brand new. This is a new copy, unlike most of the others you're seeing. They're all second hand. This was brand new. This is great value for money, and I'm looking forward to reading it very much. And that brings the total to £37.57, and that's £3.13 per book. So we've gone over the £3 here, which I didn't want to do. I wanted to try and keep it below £3. Did I? Well, we'll find out, because there's another four books to go. See, I told you I couldn't count. Anyway, the next one is similar in the sense that it's another author I've kind of been meaning to try him for years, but that's not quite accurate, because I did try him, and it's Nathaniel Hawthorne, and I read The House of Seven Gables. It's his most famous book, and I wasn't very impressed, I'm afraid to say. I felt it rambled, lacked focus, and I couldn't understand why it was considered such a classic. And that kind of put me off him. And this was quite a while back. And I thought, well, no, I'm not going to bother reading any more stuff by him. And then in one of the British Library's Tales of the Weird series, they included the story Rappaccini's Daughter. And I thought that was brilliant, and that really blew me away. And I thought, well, okay, I'm going to give Hawthorne another go. And the most famous collection of his short stories, of course, is Twice Told Tales. And I managed to get this second-hand copy for a grand price of £4.41. So again, a little bit expensive, which brought the total to £41.98 and an average per book of £3.22. So still going up there, which is a bit unfortunate. So, for the... Oops, the pile just fell over on the floor. So at £42 almost, I only had £8 left. Could I get 3 more books to fit in to that price range and take the total to 16, which would be pretty good, would be more than I was expecting. So I turned to Lost World Literature and spent hours and hours going through long lists of titles and seeing what I could find. Most of those Lost World books are pretty obscure, a lot of them are very old, and surprisingly quite a few of them are available, but they tend to be old hardbacks, either printed in the early part of the 20th century or old library books, those kind of things. And with the best will in the world, even if they're not in great condition, they don't tend to be just a couple of pounds. They do tend to be a bit more expensive. So it's encouraging that I could find so many of them for, like later on when I'm book hauling again, whenever the hell that is. But yeah, not too many cheap. They really were titles that needed to have been republished in more recent years so that I could get second-hand paperbacks. And luckily, I was able to find some. And the first of these was this one, A Strange Manuscript Found in a Copper Cylinder by James DeMille. Now, I know nothing about this at all, apart from it's on the list of Lost World Literature, and it's popular enough to be republished in the 2000s, because this isn't that old a paperback. It's second-hand, but I think it was 2011 copy, I think. So, yeah, it must have something going for it. Well, at least hope so. Anyway, this one was only £2.59, which made for a total of £44.57 and £3.18 per book. And at this point, I was resigned, really, that I'm not going to get that price per book down to below £3. Do I? Well, we'll see. But no, I don't, actually. Anyway... Next up, the penultimate book, is this one, which was Charlotte Perkins Gilman's Herland. Now, Gilman, if you've never heard of her, was an ardent feminist in the early part of the 20th century, and she wrote a trio of utopian feminist novels, of which this is number 2. But it's not a strict trio in the fact that you have to read them in order. The first one apparently was more of a manifesto than an actual fictional story and was called Moving the Mountain. I couldn't find a cheap copy of that, but I could find a cheap copy of this one, the second one, Herland, which is a very slim volume, as you can see, and that's reflected in the price because it cost me only £2.38, which took my total to £46.95 and £3.13 per book. If you're not familiar with Gilman at all, it's well worth checking out a story she wrote, a short story called The Yellow Wallpaper, because that is absolutely terrific and one of the creepiest things I've ever read. So I would thoroughly recommend that. And as soon as I saw that Gilman had actually written some Lost World literature, I thought, yeah, we got to check that out. So £3.05 left. Wanted to find one book for that price or less that would complete my 16 volumes in this book haul, and I found one, and it was an old classic. It's a book that I think I was given to read at school but never read, which is a bit damning, because I used to read everything at school, even the stuff that was really hard to get through, like Thomas Hardy and Shakespeare, even though giving 14-year-old Shakespeare is, I don't know why they do that. Do they still do that in schools? It's just guaranteed to turn people off Shakespeare for life, really, isn't it? Because you're not going to cope with that when you're 14 years of age. Subsequently, I do like Shakespeare, despite that experience. I can't say the same about Thomas Hardy, though. Anyway, this was a book I was given but never finished, never read. Don't know why, can't remember, but it's a classic. It's very well known, very famous, probably maybe the most famous book out of all these, actually. It's King Solomon's Mines by H. Rider Haggard. Now, obviously, I've read the She novels that Haggard wrote. King Solomon's Mines, its main character is Alan Quatermain, and he actually has a crossover with She in She and Alan, rather an obvious title, which is the third book that Haggard wrote about Asia. So yeah, I've always wanted to get back to the Quatermain stuff at some point, and I thought, well, I looked through the whole Quatermain series actually, because he wrote quite a lot about Alan Quatermain, and although this was one of the first he wrote, it takes place far later in Quatermain's life than most of his work, and so I did actually toy with the idea of reading them chronologically in terms of his life, because I think he starts out as a very young man in the Zulu Wars, and this occurs very much later in his life. I couldn't find anything cheaper than this. This was obviously the cheapest thing I could find. So I'll just bite the bullet and read this one instead. And it was only £2.20. So this was one of the cheapest of the lot. And it took my final total to £49.15 for 16 books, which is a price per book of £3.07. So I'm well pleased with that. As I say, there are 16 books I actually want to read, not just books that I picked up because they were cheap and looked interesting. And I felt like a real satisfaction from getting this book haul sorted out, especially knowing that, as I say, it's going to be the last one that I do for quite some time. So that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. Have you read any of these books, apart from King Solomon's Mines? I suppose you've read that one. But yeah, let me know what you think of them in the comments below. Let me know if any of them look kind of interesting for you. And as I say, thank you very much for sticking with me right the way to the end of the video. And remember, keep searching through those second-hand bookshops and charity stores, because there are treasures out there that only you can find. Cheers.